Hi, this is Scott Mautz. I am international speaker and author of Leading from the Middle, a playbook for helping managers to influence up, down, and across the organization. I'm a leadership speaker and workshopper, and today you're going to learn three powerful things. Number one, how middle managers are the backbone of any organization and why you should take pride in that role rather than feeling stigmatized. Number two, you're going to learn what are the kick in the ass challenges that middle managers face, and they might be ones that you're not even aware of. And number three, you are going to learn how to lead up, down, and across the organization with a great tip to help you out in every direction. So stay tuned, you're going to love it.
Welcome back to our delicious conversation with Scott Mautz. He is the three-time award-winning author. He's an international keynote speaker. He is a superstar on every possible count, and he's been named as CEO thought leader by Chief Executive Guild, and he's one of the top 50 leadership innovators by Inc.com, where he is a top columnist, where his articles get about 1.5 million monthly reads. So, you know, guy knows a bit. He's also the author of a fantastic new book called Leading from the Middle, a playbook for managers of influence to influence up, down, and across organizations. And in the first part of the conversation, we talked about, you know, that tightrope that is the middle management. We talked about how middle managers are often sort of forgotten, even by the people who used to be them, and then they've come up. And where we got to sort of at the end of our last conversation was talking about scope, and it's an acronym that Scott uses, but it's also a reality, of course, the scope of that job. And one of the things I was talking about, brought up, was that in middle management, in many ways, is kind of this prep for what it means to be an entrepreneur, because you are leading up, down, across. You're shifting hats all the time. And Scott used the analogy of, you know, having to both be the engineer and the artist. You've got to sort of create this marinade from all of these things. And in the break, Scott and I were talking about this, the distinction. A lot of times with leadership, one of the things that frustrates me is that as a society, we've all become very niche. And as leaders have become very niche. They're supposed to be like this, or they're supposed to be like that. And yet middle managers who make the best leaders when they get to that, when they climb that, are the guys who actually have had a generalist knowledge. They've had to understand, how does HR work? They've had to understand, how does sales work? They've had to understand, how does marketing work? How does accounting work? How does, you know, many different departments. They've had to build that generalist mentality that we're often kind of dismissive of. So the scope of that job is vast. You gave us what the acronym is. I want to walk through a little bit more about what that acronym is in this part. I want to walk through some of the steps in understanding it. And of course, I want to get to the subtitle of the book, which is Leading Up, Down, and Across, so that people in that position can really go, oh, that's how you do it.
Yeah, sounds
so
good.
Let's jump in.
Yeah, so let me give a little bit more detail on scope, and in particular, I'm going to focus on one letter that may or may not surprise people. So again, the acronym I use, SCOPE, describes the unique challenges of the middle manager. It's in the scope of their job, but it also stands for, you know, S stands for self-identity. I'll come back to that one. Mm-hmm. C is conflict, which is almost self-explanatory, that you face conflict in every direction. The O is omnipotence. You're expected to know everything, whereas upper managers aren't necessarily, and the people that are new are too new to know everything. And then right. The P and E are the physical and the emotional. And I touched on the physical and the emotional with my story of the study of, you know, studying monkeys and their monkey poop, which right. I left to you to do. So what I want to do is go back and focus on the number one most difficult challenge for middle managers, which is represented in the S and scope, which is self-identity. Mm-hmm. Because of, you mentioned before, you're a big fan of neuroscience. We were talking in the break, and I get a chance to work with a fair amount of neuroscientists in the second, you know, this second season of my life. And what I can tell you is they describe the problem of, you know, when you're a middle manager, you have to wear a lot of hats. Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're within a corporation and you're a middle manager, you have to wear a lot of hats, and you're always changing those hats throughout the day, right? Well, neuroscientists call what really exhausts us micro transitions. The number of times that you have to change hats, and it kind of goes like this, right? So you have to go, Dove, from a deferential stance to your boss to an assertive stance with your employees to collaborative mode with your peers. Oftentimes you have to do this all within the same meeting. And you might have to switch into one of those roles you weren't expecting to play. So you're sitting in you're with your team and you're leading it, the team, and you're all happy, and your boss walks in. Boom, all of a sudden, you have to switch gears and get into a different mode because your boss is in the room now, right? You go from moments of tremendous autonomy to feeling like a cog in the wheel to moments where you feel like you can make lots of decisions, and then in other moments where you feel like, yeah, but they're not the big ones. And guess what? This wears us down. It causes us that these micro transitions are constantly what tires us out, and people think it's because of the amount of work that middle managers have to do. And our research has shown that actually the amount you have to do is no less, no more than anyone else in an organization.
No.
The amount of transitions, that's what exhausts you, right? Does that make sense? Are you surprised by that?
Not at all. I mean, this is because if you look at Dave Crenshaw's work, which was his book was called The Myth of Multitasking. One of the things that Dave talked about was, and I was with Dave about 10 years ago. We were at a conference together and we were sitting there and he walked me through the exercise that he now does on a regular basis, where he asks you to do something and just do it. And then it asks you to do it as a multitask and you time yourself. And oh my God, like you do it as a multitask, brutally slow, brutally slow. Oh yeah, I could do that easy. And this is one of the things he addresses is that we actually think we're good at multitasking and we're crap at it because the switching of the brain is so depleting. And if you have to multitask, something that you just said that I want to really nail home is you're multitasking not just your tasks, but your identity.
That's right.
And in my work around the emotional source code of human beings, and organizations and communities and nations, it is the identity that is the most emotionally, bam, this is what we get triggered into and we cling on to it. And if I've now got to give it up, that takes a lot of energy to give that up. And if my identity is I'm the manager, do as I say, then it's like, oh, I'm the employee of the boss. I need to tilt my hat and tug my forelock, or I'm a collaborator with my co-workers, co-middle managers. That I can imagine is massively exhausting.
And not even to mention, not to lose sight of, oh, by the way, the productivity hits you get, because what Dave has taught, and I've seen this before, Earl Miller, a neuroscientist from MIT, talks about this a lot. What the brain is really good at, Dov, is task switching, going back and forth between two tasks. They often even use the same part of the brain so fast that it tricks our brain into giving the illusion of productivity. But in truth, when you're multitasking, you're losing on average about 40 to 50% of your ability to do tasks. And you probably experienced that when you went through that exercise that Dave told you to go through. So yes, identity gets split. Yeah, without question, productivity, it all suffers if you're not careful when you're leading from the middle.
So, you want to focus in on this piece around identity, and I think that's a very important thing. So how do we, let's say I'm in a middle management position right now. How do I ground that, Scott? Because I feel this pull, this switching. I feel the emotional, mental drain of that. How do I bring that, like, what are the strategies you offer for me as a middle manager to go, I'm freaking exhausted. How do I stop being so exhausted by this seemingly inevitable need to switch?
What's incredible is you would be astonished, Dov, at what the data shows us about, we talked to over 3,000 successful middle managers is a backbone of the research for the book Leading from the Middle. And one of the themes we found over and over again is that the ones that were most successful at overcoming this overwhelming feeling of, I am always switching hats, like holy moly, it really does come back to their ability to mentally reframe. And I shared some reframes earlier that I think are worth very briefly mentioning because
Yep.
they're all examples that came from actual successful middle managers, the ones that don't look at their job as this is exhausting to keep switching and be in the middle of everything. But what it is I think like an engineer, I feel like an artist. What it is I'm working on the long term and the short term flame. I work on the business and in the business. What it is to me is not 100 roles segregated. It's one role integrated that only the best of the best have the skills and the ability to be able to do it. It's a lot about turning the whole fact that you're switching constantly on its head to say, and how many people can do it as well as I do it. It's something to take real pride in. And we've seen successful middle managers tell us that over and over and over again.
So that again is now an interesting, you bring up another interesting point psychologically, because psychologically there is this, don't be a big head, don't get too proud of yourself, right? Don't, and at the same time, you've got to be ambitious and you've got to speak up for yourself. These bloody contradictory messages that are extremely confusing. But really what I'm hearing from you is that it's essential, the self-recognition of not everybody can do this, mate, right? Do a survey. If you're a middle management, do a survey and go around to people and say, if you had to do X and Y and Z while doing A, B, and C, while also juggling 1, 2, and 4, how do you think you'd do? Oh, I might kill myself. I might eat donuts all day just to avoid going to work.
Right. And Dove, I'm not talking about mindless self-belief and
No.
ridiculous mantras that, oh, I can do it. It's grounded in, take a look at what you're accomplishing, how well you're doing it, and how many people would be crushed under the weight of what you're
Yes.
trying to do. People lose perspective of the magic that's happening when they're in the middle of the organization trying to influence their boss and their boss's boss, their employees, and people over whom they have no influence, the peer group. It's an astonishing small miracle of the working world. And it's something to take real pride in.
Absolutely. So let's walk through that a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about each of those, managing, influencing up, down, and across. So give us some tips.
Yeah, let me, I'll give you one tip for each, because I get asked this a lot, right? Let's start with probably the toughest one. Most people say they have a really difficult time managing up, managing your boss. If you're in the case of, an entrepreneur, managing your board or owners, anybody like that. Here's a really powerful tip that I talk about in the book, and it's filled with tons of plays. This is one of my favorites to manage up. You have to understand the asks, which means to be crystal clear on expectations, and I'm going to give you a tool on how to do that. But first, I want to challenge assumptions of your viewers and your listeners, which is to say, do not assume you're as clear on expectations as you think you are. We conducted research with over 300 pairs of bosses and subordinates, Dove, where we found that despite their protestations in the beginning of our interviews, that we're crystal clear on what's expected. When we interviewed them individually, kind of like, the FBI separating the, one victim from, one person from the other. When we separated them, we found that they were material breaches in basic understanding of expectations 81%, if you want to be precise, 81% of the time. So don't assume you're as clear on expectations as you might be. Now, to do that, here's one simple tool. It's called the Good to Great Grid. And it's based on a very simple philosophy, which is people often don't do great work that they're expected to do because they don't know what great looks like. So imagine, very simple. Imagine a simple column, Dove. In the first column are key skills important at your company. Second column, good. Third column, great. You sit down with your employee or with your boss and you say, let's write out the definition, literally, between good on leadership and great on leadership. And what happens is that tension forces you to be very specific. A lot of times we're not clear on expectations because our boss is lazy. He or she doesn't, they just assume that but the specificity of having to write good versus great gets you to an incredible amount of clarity. It's a really, really powerful tool for getting clear on expectations.
So I'm in the middle management and I got to go to my boss and say, let's do this.
Yeah.
How do I influence them to do it?
Yeah.
Because that's it. Well, listen, Charlie, that's a great idea, but I'm really busy.
That's right. The thing that we always hear, right? It comes from a place you can take the higher road and say, by defining this, I will be better suited and better able to deliver on what you truly think are great expectations on a variety of skills that are important, whether it's leadership, priority setting, risk taking, a small investment, dear boss, in putting a few words on paper of what you think about is good and what you think is great drives such an incredible amount of clarity. And most clients that do this say, you can do this if you pick a couple of key skills that you want to get a measurement on, good versus great. You could do it in 15 minutes with a boss. The key is forcing them to be precise in their language, and that unlocks magic because they're forced to get really clear on what great looks like. It's that tension in defining that sets you free.
That's fantastic. I love that. Hey, I mean, what? And by the way, let's just take this a little bit step further, just as a little bonus here. Go home tonight and ask your partner, what would it take for me to be what definition of a good husband and a great husband, or a good wife and a great wife, or a good life partner and a great life partner. You may be surprised that you're fumbling in good. Now ask your kids, great dad, good dad, right?
That's right.
And say you can't include toys or money.
That's right. And here's another benefit. You might find out you're great at something that you merely thought you were good at. And
exactly.
Now you now have just identified a strength that you can leverage even more so.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. So that's how we manage and influence up.
Yeah. Okay, let's go across. Here's a very powerful one. You know, when I talk across, we're usually talking about people over whom you have no formal authority, whether you're an entrepreneur or within a small company, big company, it doesn't matter. So to get this point across, I want to do a little test with you, Dove. I'm going to turn it back on you, and I'm going to turn it to the host for just a second. And I want you to do me a favor. I want you to think of somebody in your work. Let's keep it to professional life for now, okay? Sure. Think of someone in your professional life who, you know, you didn't report to. They had no formal influence or authority over you. Yep. And yet they were tremendously influential on you. Let me know when you have that person in mind. You have like a visual of them. Okay, now here's what I want you to do. Thinking of that person, I want you to think of a moment perhaps that you spent with them, a moment that you cherish. Helps bring them into focus. With that person in mind now, did they do one of four things? Did they care? Did they listen? Did they give? Did they teach? Or did they do all four?
All four.
And that, my friend, is the golden rule of influence, building on some work by a great author, Dan Schwartz. I've dubbed it the golden rule of influence. Believe me, if you care, if you listen, if you give, if you teach, you will be disproportionately likely to influence those over whom you have no formal authority. It is as simple and as powerful as that, the golden rule of influence. I'd love to see your listeners taking that in. Care, listen, give, teach.
Give, teach. Yes.
That's
but I love, and I want people to pay attention to the order there, because teach is last. It's not first.
By intent.
Yeah, I think that's the point, right? Because we think we're helping and we start teaching somebody something, like, you haven't even heard my problem. I don't feel heard yet. Right. So the fact that when I think of that person, every single conversation with that person, I know that is actually the basis for our friendship. This person is a business influence on me. I'm a business influence on them, but our friendship is based on those same four categories. So of course we naturally have a lot of influence on each other. That's really great. So now we've got how to influence and manage up. We've got how to influence and manage across. Now there's the down, which is, we've talked a lot about this on this show. You're a leader, you've got to lead others. And oftentimes I think that gets confusing, because it's, do I do servant leadership or do I do authoritarian leadership? And so walk us through, how do we do this?
Yeah, there's I get into a great depth in the book on how, leading from the middle, because obviously that's a key part of leading from the middle. So the way I could talk for hours on this. So what I'm going to do, Dov, is just focus on what my audience asks me the most often in this
Sure.
space, which by far, the question I get most often is, as a leader of others, help me figure out how to give feedback in a way that's going to work. Give me a
Yes.
simple couple of tips, right? You've probably heard this before, but I can tell you, you cannot underestimate the impact that you can have or how much you can screw up your relationship with someone based on the quality of feedback. Here's the rules. It's real simple. 6 fundamentals. You got to be specific, right? My grandpa used to say, white bread ain't nutritious, which means it's bland and it's generic. If that's your feedback, you're not going to nurture anybody. It has to be granular and whole, right? It has to be sincere. If it comes from the heart, it sticks in the mind. It has to be calibrating, meaning you got to put some context to it, or people are going to take your feedback and go right off the hill to it and assume the worst and catastrophize. You got to tell them, look, this is something you need to work on. And it's very natural at this stage of your development. Or if you got to give them a little spanking, look, you got to improve this quickly if you want to get it promoted any time in our lifetime. Another quick rule, I'll give you a few more rules of giving feedback. You got to be proportionate. In general, don't overstate or understate what you're praising or pushing on. Remember that people generally do a lot more good than bad, and most research will show you 5-to-1 is the right ratio. 5 pieces of productive, constructive, positive feedback for every 1 constructive piece of positive feedback where you're kind of redirecting them, right? With the exception of when you have a long-standing relationship. You don't need to do 5-to-1 anymore. You can go 1-to-1. Look, I need you to do this because you have a long-standing relationship. Then if you're timely and you're tailored, really understanding how people want to receive feedback, you'll be in great shape. And I always like to say there's 3 kinds of people in this world, Dov. The first kind of person is the person who says, I want to receive my feedback straight. Give me the tough stuff right up front, or I can't even enjoy the rest of it. That's me. Right. Second kind of person, give me the compliment sandwich. Tell me something nice, give me the hard stuff, tell me something nice. The third kind of person in the world, Dov, is the person who says the first, but they really mean the second. How do you find out? You ask and you can tailor feedback accordingly. Right. I can promise you those 6 things, those 6 simple principles, and we didn't even get in to the traps you can fall into with feedback, will take you a long ways towards a positive relationship and influencing down the organization.
That is really solid and practical. I think that feedback is a very important piece, as you obviously realize, because people, as a leader, whatever your level of leadership is, people live and die on your word.
Oh, that's so true.
I mean, you can completely ruin somebody's freaking day because you were not paying attention to how you delivered the feedback.
That's right.
And the old shit sandwich was the term we used to use.
That's right. That's right.
Which is the nice stuff, then the poop in the middle, and then the nice stuff on the outside. And that's still a decent idea, but what you're talking about is far more scientific and far more understandable. But one of the key things I think, and I've recognized in my work, is you also have to give feedback, and you pointed it out really clearly here, is you have to give feedback in the way the person wants it.
Yes,
and if you don't believe me, ask your partner, do you feel loved? And the partner goes, not really. And you go, but I tell you every day. And you're like, yeah, but you never do the dishes. You take me for granted. Right? Well, that act of love to them is more valuable than saying it. And that's just one example of understanding. If you take the time to say, how do you need it? So one of the things is some people need praise that's public. No. Some people hate public praise.
That's right.
They don't like it at all. So if you call them out in front of everybody, John did a great job, Susan did a fantastic job with our team, and blah, blah, blah. They're like crawling under their own skin. But if you have them in the office, they love it. Or you give them a personal handwritten card, they're like glowing for months. If somebody else, you give them that card, and they're like, yeah, Nobody gives a shit. Like, I need to recognize me in front of everybody else. Like, my coworkers need to know how amazing I am, because they all take me for granted. Like, taking the time to, it's what you talked about before in the four what do you call it? Golden rules
The
of
golden
influence.
rule of influence, yeah.
Golden rule of influence, which is, you got to be willing to care. You got to be willing to listen. You got to be willing to do these things before you even get to the feedback. And I
right.
love what you're doing there.
And you have to be so intentional about the feedback because there's a real cost, especially when you want to give constructive feedback, Dov, to doing it wrong. Check it out. Guess what? Our brain, neuroscientists have it's proven this now. Our brain registers social rejection in the same way in the same place of the brain it registers physical pain. And if you don't agree with that, here's a simple test. I'll bet, Dov, you could tell me and remember a piece of feedback delivered to you harshly 10 years old, 15 years old. I bet you could remember one. If I asked you to, I bet you could tell me one.
Yep.
We don't forget that. There's a price to doing it wrong and such a benefit to doing it right.
Yep. Yeah. I in the work I do with high-level achievers, and we talk about trauma. And one of the things I'll say about trauma, I say, you think trauma is this big dramatic event, but it's often not. It's your dad turned around to you on a particular day and said, "Listen, you piece of poo," and and you suddenly were like, you're devastated for years, and you're carrying that stuff around as if, and he could have easily taken an axe to your head because it's not any different to your brain.
That's right. May as well have been right. That's right.
And that's why I think that, for me, a lot of the work that you do and that I'm doing is really calling us to be a lot more accountable to the impact and the influence that we can have. And the fact that, I want to say this here right now, the fact that you are putting this forward now, Scott, for middle managers, because we all know that most people are 10 years into their leadership before they get any leadership training.
That's right.
Which is bullshit.
Right.
There's no other word for it, right? They're 10 years into it. They're fumbling their way around, and they're causing some, there is some good stuff, but they're also causing a wake of problems in people's lives. And we're now embittered by that experience, not because the middle manager was bad, but because they didn't know how to be good, and they certainly didn't know how to be great. And so I want to give you full props. No, me, no smoke machine. I don't blow smoke up anybody's skirt. I want to give you full props for your generosity to go back and say, you know what? We're not taking care of these. These are and that's what I said in my intro. This is the middle management, is the middle class of the business. It is the backbone of our economy in the world, is the middle class, and we're letting it slide, and it's sad. And we're doing the same in business. And if we do that in business, we're going to watch everything decline. And I love that you are being the champion for middle managers, and I really appreciate it. So I just want you to know that as we finish up.
Thank you so much. It comes from the heart. It comes from a place of experience, not just research, but I've been there, man. I have been there.
I believe you. So as we're about to finish up, Scott, again, I want to thank you because what you've delivered is extremely valuable and extremely practical. Again, I'm going to ask you to let people know where they can find out about you, about the book. Can they find you on social? Where's the best way to reach out to you? All those kinds of things.
Sounds great. The book is Leading from the Middle, a playbook for managers to influence up, down, and across the organization. And I think you're really going to find it of great value. It fills an unmet need. You can find out more about me at scottmautz.com. You can find out about all the speeches that I give, all the talks that I do, the classes that I teach, training and workshops that I do, leadership training that I do. And if you go to scottmautz.com/free tools, no space in between free and tools, you'll also get a free 30-page PDF workbook that I put together for listeners of Dov Baron that will give you, lots of exercises, fill in the blank, all kinds of questions you can answer that go along with the book, Leading from the Middle, to help you get the absolute most out of it.
Thank you, sir. It is a pleasure and honor always having a combo with you. And for you to listen, remember, you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any of our past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups, just go look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com, because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can lead up, down, and across. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.